All right, you guys ready? So I am, just as for introduction, Scott Thompson. I am on the account team for Allied Universal Services. Really excited to have them out here, specifically because we consider them one of the most successful customers at Domo. I'm not going to say they're the most because other people at Domo might get mad at me for that. Huge impacts on the business, right? So they were able to deliver close to 50 million in business value in about a year's time. So massive impact. Props to them with the Domo platform. I'll let them obviously tell you the story of how. So I'd love to introduce Jesse Kreitzman. He's the Director of BI at AUS, and Tyler Nelson, which is the Organizational Effectiveness Manager. Give it up for them.
Thanks so much, Scott. Appreciate it. Thanks, guys. All right, want to kick us off?
Yeah. All right, well, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us, appreciate it. So as Scott mentioned, I'm Tyler Nelson. This is Jesse Kreitzman. And we're really gonna be going over how to operationalize your cards. So really the topic is, we made all these dashboards, we saw stories, we saw actionable data, all those things over the last couple of days, but how do you actually drive change within an organization? So I'm the Organizational Effectiveness Manager. Basically, I travel to all the branches in our company, and we'll go over just a short background in a second, but I work in the field with our branches to gain adoption and actually drive these metrics and increase profitability across the business.
And I run as a Director of Business Intelligence, or Business Insight as I call it, in analytics. I manage our BI team, in quotes, I say, because it's really myself and one other individual on my direct team, and we manage our Domo instance. I also manage our Center of Excellence, which we'll talk a little bit about today, because that really has been critical for us in terms of maintaining our instance and really going live and generating all that value that Scott mentioned. And I've been with the organization for just about 4 years now.
So we're going to provide just some brief context about our company and how we use Domo and how big our Domo instance is. So we're the largest security company in North America, third largest in the world. We just crossed $7 billion in revenue this past year, and that's 200,000 employees. So very distributed workforce. We have 160 local branches across the US, Puerto Rico, Canada, and expanding outside the country as well. So when I joined a little under 2 years ago, we were at $4 billion in revenue. So the growth has been very impressive, and so we've actually had to be able to scale this up at tremendous speed.
And I think one of the biggest challenges we've had is that before I go over the facts here, is that when Tyler mentions a distributed workforce, what he means is that as he mentioned, we have 200,000 employees. They're security guards primarily. And what distributed means is they don't work at a branch office. They don't work in a location that we have a receptionist or that they have a computer at. They're distributed at client sites. And so imagine the challenge that presents in terms of communicating and really improving the efficiency of the business. I mean, how do you do that when you don't have a direct line to those employees? And so we leverage Domo in a lot of cases for that. Some quick facts about our use of Domo. Actually, these numbers are a little outdated now. We just rolled out to a huge group last week. So right now, we're just under 5,000 users. Our largest increase has been earlier in our rollout, we actually rolled out to 1,000 users in a single week, which is pretty awesome. All of we won't go through this too much today, but our users, our groups, our PDP, basically the whole dynamic group and PDP process that you guys saw earlier, or yesterday actually, a demo of, we have been doing that for a while now, again, because of the scale. Again, as I mentioned, some of these stats are outdated, but in our instance, we have just under 1 million PDP rules, because effectively every one of our users is completely unique. They only have access to their book of business. We have a large number of cards, large number of data flows, a lot of PDP sets and rules, and as I said, just a lot of activity that required us to really ensure that we were as efficient as possible when rolling this out. Some of the transformative programs, let's just give you guys kind of an idea when we say 50 million, really what that means and where that comes from. The 30 million in revenue, that's an annual recovery that we've made. And that's, again, just from programs that we've been able to surface through Domo. Prior to Domo, we didn't have, the communication mechanism, the ability for our users to, interact with the alerts and the charting and whatnot. And so that for us has been just absolutely huge. Made some advancements in workers' comp. What else do we have here? Benefit management, onboarding, and a bunch of other smaller projects. And that was all in just the last year. And so we're on track to do even better this year with some of the new programs we have rolling out. So we hope to be back up here in front of you guys again in a year's time with some even better numbers. In terms of takeaways today, we'll just go through these real quick. We're going to kind of show you, I know work smarter, not harder, kind of a cliche, but it's actually really true. And so we'll talk a little bit about how to do that. We're also going to talk, one of the biggest benefits of Domo is that you don't need to be a tech wizard. You don't need to be, somebody who's been a developer to be able to implement, really successful programs in Domo. And so we'll talk a little bit about how to do that. And then also how to kind of start, how to kind of roll all of your work up to a single program to just help it give a little bit more context, but get you a little bit more buy-in from your users.
So the first one we'll go over is work smarter, not harder. So underneath this is operational improvements. Basically, what do people regularly do outside of Domo that we could bring in? So repeatable tasks, reporting, things along those lines. Knowledge sharing. So we'll go over kind of keeping things in your back pocket, as well as like how do you take all this information and knowledge that you have and share it efficiently throughout the company. Driving awareness is a big thing. If people don't know about Domo and they're not using it, then it's not really a time-saving tool. And then time to market. So as Jesse mentioned, we have a BI Center of Excellence that we rely on heavily. So the first thing is how can Domo make you more efficient? So repeated tasks. So as we were building out this Domo instance, I would travel to the branches and they're talking about their process of either tracking candidates or doing client business reviews, just weekly status updates about how many people we've hired. And they're going into our applicant tracking system, downloading all that data, doing a lot of Excel work, and a lot of people aren't super Excel savvy in our company too. So we took that and said, how can we bring this into Domo? How can we make it automated for you and save you time? And so through that, we created some pages around client business reviews. What do we show our clients on a regular basis that our client managers are consistently having to produce? Kind of some context, we have over 12,000 clients. So if you can imagine a client manager or a client relation manager developing 12,000 reports 2 or 3 times a year, that's a significant amount of time that we can save them by creating a page and then just allowing them to export into a PowerPoint, and you have a pre-made slide deck for you already. And all you have to do is add some notes. And then transparency. So what Domo's really allowed us to do is dive into the most granular level, but then also roll that up and show everybody at the entire company how they are doing. As Jesse mentioned, we're highly distributed. So we have about 4,000 hiring managers across those 12,000 client sites, and then they roll up into 160 branches, and then we have 2 corporate offices. So even our corporate offices are split. So how can you show metrics across the entire company that everybody is aware of, so they're all driving towards the same goals, the same metrics, and things along those lines?
Real quick on that point too, we've also found it's a huge time saver, because you think, for example, all of the requests that our marketing team gets, they need to, or our sales team, I should say, they need to help prepare for an RFP or for a bid. And the question is, well, what's your turnover? How many other offices do you have in this geographical area that can help support the business we're doing? What is your average rate cycle in that area? And those are all things we're able to answer by using these kind of enterprise-wide stats. So again, there's a whole page dedicated just to stats that we don't reveal our client book in that to our employees. We strip out some identifiable info, and that's how we've felt comfortable doing this. Because again, we don't want an operator in Tennessee getting our whole book of business and knowing what that is. Even though they work for the company, we don't have a public client list, and so we want to protect that. So again, the way we do that, like I said, is we strip out that identifiable info, but we generate enough that there is still value in it, and that the field can see this and they can make decisions on it. And it doesn't require us, like I said, to prepare manual reports for them every time that there's a new need.
So the next piece is knowledge sharing. Right now what you're looking at is a snapshot of one of my overview pages. I personally have probably over 200 cards that I've made just out of curiosity. And I don't delete any of them. So I do an analysis. I say, okay, this either worked or it didn't work. But some of these cards are over a year old. Some of them are brand new. But basically, I've kept everything. And as I've gone to branches, people will ask me questions. Like as we've gotten more and more information, and it's not going to the spreadsheet to find out what's our aggregate revenue. It's drilling in and say, how profitable is this job, or how well are we scheduling at this site? It leads to other questions that want to be answered, and some questions that maybe I had previously. And so I keep those answers to my questions here. And if anybody brings it up, I can say, oh yeah, let's look at that, or I'll share that card with you. And it may not be something that's useful for the entire business, but it helps answer a question for somebody that was looking for an answer. And we can do that just by maintaining and keeping the work we've already done. Granted, you have to go back every once in a while and make sure all this data is still relevant, so I'll do a cleanup every so often, but I try not to delete as much as possible, just so that I have things available if and when I need them. Now, probably the most important thing of working smarter, not harder, is driving awareness. So, as Jesse mentioned, we have 4,000 users, or sorry, almost 5,000 users now, and people use Domo to varying degrees. We have probably a couple thousand users that are dedicated and really use it, and then we have some individuals that come to us and say, you know, where did this report come from, or how do I get access to Domo? So there are kind of varying degrees of users, and it's how can we engage everybody with at scale. So how do you contact 4,000 people that aren't located in one place? How do you get that memo across? And so we've done some interesting things recently, but essentially people don't use what they do not understand. So if somebody comes to us and says, listen, I don't understand what this card is, I don't understand how to do this, that means to us that we didn't do a good job in explaining it in the first place. So we'll go back, we'll create a note card, or we'll redo the card, we'll add different labels, we'll change the title, we'll try to make it as user-friendly as possible, because if one person had that question, and it most likely means that somebody else has that question too. They just either didn't know how to ask the question, or didn't know who to contact, or just didn't end up asking that question. And the second thing is, many people would use Domo, more people would use it if we had what they wanted. A lot of times they'll actually go to the branches and they'll say, you know what, I've seen Domo, it looks really slick, but you know what, it doesn't have this card, or like it's not telling me how much all my employees are actually working, like how many hours they're actually working every week. And so a lot of times those cards actually exist. As Jesse showed, we have over 200 production cards. So we've built out a lot of these metrics that actually drive our business. And so it's a matter of just showing them where it lies. So training is a huge thing for us. And then the BICOE has really been how we've taken it from a couple people managing Domo to really transforming and ingraining it within different functional groups. And Jesse will talk about that as well. And then a governance program, so as you mentioned, PDP, we want it to be where people can only see their data. If everybody saw the entire company, one, that wouldn't be ideal since everybody would know what our entire book of business is and how we run our business, but also you would always have to filter for your specific data. So when everybody logs in, we want to show them the most important view for them, so their level and nothing more, and also their book of business, so what jobs that they're responsible for, what hours, what clients, so that they know what actions they need to take at a moment's notice, rather than having to do a lot of extra work to get to those solutions. And the last thing was Course Builder, and I'll let Jess talk to that.
Yeah, I think one other quick note there too on the governance program, one of the things that we found to be really successful, and particularly as it relates to driving awareness, is the need to constantly groom the cards that we have out there. You know, as Tyler mentioned, there are individuals who don't realize that there are cards out there that would be valuable to them, that they would use, because sometimes they're just oversaturated. You know, 250 cards is a lot. Now granted, they're not all meant to be looked at every day. Some are meant to really just be used as kind of more of a research tool. But periodically we go through and we review them, and we pull out cards that don't need to be shown anymore. We combine them where we can. We occasionally split out if we have to, but again, it's really about reviewing and ensuring that the cards you have available to your users are relevant, that they're driving value, and again, you can do that by keeping your offering concise, let's put it. The last item up here is Course Builder, and that, for those of you who aren't familiar, it's Domo's almost kind of an LMS app. You can actually build out training programs very, very similar, in fact, almost exactly what Domo provides when they release new features, for example, or if you've gone into the Knowledge Center and you've looked around and kind of seen some of the course type apps that you can download. We actually leveraged that to build our own custom apps in-house. So what we did was we actually took Domo's kind of intro level, I forget the original name of it. We actually take their initial course and we've customized it for our users. So there were one or two features that our users were not going to use because we didn't enable them. We pulled those out. We also added in information specifically about what information they're going to be able to see. So when I look at a card and I look at a list of my employees, here's how we determine who your employees are. We talk to them about how often the data is refreshed. So we try and answer as many of those questions as we've gotten up front, so they're aware of those things before they go in. And this may surprise you, but we recently found that, I think it was close to, I don't remember the exact number, but it was maybe close to half of our users didn't realize you could drill into the cards. And that's foundational, right, in Domo, that we all kind of take that for granted, and that's what we did. And so we added that up front at the beginning of our course program now, and now people are aware. And so that for us, especially given that we use that as a prerequisite, users, they come into our environment, but they don't get access to any other cards and pages until they complete that assignment, basically. Once they complete the course, we capture that, and then we grant them broader access. And that goes for everybody. I mean, whether they're a single site manager or whether they're a vice president of an entire division, everybody goes through this. And again, that helps us to ensure that users are aware of what's going on before they even sign in and start interacting with the platform. The next slide here we talk about is this is really one of the ways that we've been able to roll out so fast, is kind of our architecture and how we've architected. When I say architecture, I don't mean from a technical perspective. I don't mean from the platform and the type of what do you want to call it? The type of technology solutions we have in place. It's really from the way we've structured my team, our center of excellence, our major domos around the organization. So obviously we start at the top with a business need, right? There are tons of business needs around the organization. That is going to be collected between myself and our major domos. Our major domos, they're really, really critical for us. Myself, as I mentioned, I've got myself and one other person on the BI team, and we're responsible for the entire administration of our platform of 5,000 users. So that all the administration, all of the kind of automated components we have in place, all new data feeds as well, we bring in, because the majority of our data feeds are hosted on-prem, and so they're database-based. And so it's not something that a user can, in most cases, just hook up a connector to. So again, my team's responsible for all of that. And so if we had to also build out all the cards and maintain them, we would make absolutely no progress. And so the way we've gotten around that, around our kind of resource constraints, is we've created the center of excellence, and we have major domos. I think we have at least one in each functional area, and some areas have 2 or 3. And we're all part of our center of excellence, and we meet bi-weekly. And what we do during that time is we talk about what new features are out. What issues is one group seeing that another might benefit from a card on. Maybe the sales group just created a card that the marketing team could really leverage and benefit from. And that for us has been just hugely successful. The other really great part of that component is they're the individuals who own the cards. They help us build out the data flows initially, but they'll own them ongoing, and then they'll also own the cards. So if a user reports up to our sales manager and says, hey, this just isn't working right, I need additional filters, or I'd like to see this grouped in a different way, the sales manager has not only the ability to, but the responsibility to make that change on their own. And so they're all educated. We've got, I think, 12 people here this year. Most of our COE is here, which is great. And again, it kind of just drives, like I said, round and round, and that really helps us increase the speed of rollout. It's something we could have not done if we were relying on my team or the IT team or the BI team to do this. It's been great to be able to empower the business to be able to do that. And again, that's something we couldn't really do with another platform. Just a couple of items real quick on the bottom, just for a quick mention, some other things that are just kind of quick hints and quick tips that we've seen that have really helped us. Rolling offsets, I won't go into too much detail because we've got a lot to cover, but effectively every one of our data sets, we code into those, or I basically have coded into each one of these data sets different type of dynamic offsets we can use to filter cards so that we don't have to make updates when a new month's worth of data is available. We issue payroll weekly, and we provide a ton of reporting based on that payroll. Overtime hours, how many hours we're running, how many hours we billed, different things of that, how many hours were holiday, if we missed anything. And so all of that, in a lot of cases I've seen, before we had this, our users had to go every week and make updates to the card. Oh, now the new month of data we got it from our vendor, we have to go and change the card. So we actually created this kind of dynamic offset process that we build right into our cards that basically flags the current month. We set that as our filter on our card, and then effectively all our cards are dynamic, and we don't have to make changes as new data rolls in to accommodate those. The other thing too is we share cards across different pages wherever possible. Tyler mentioned we have different pages for each slice of the organization. They use the same cards wherever possible. And again, where we need to break out different ones, we will, but we really try and consolidate. Not only is it easier to manage, but it becomes easier to communicate a little bit to our users too. The next slide here is our business insight operating structure, and again, that's our BI COEs. I mentioned the BI COE. We're responsible for the evangelism, the advocacy, the actual practice of business insight at Domo. And we call it business insight instead of business intelligence because we really think it's all about, surfacing. That's our role, is to really surface insight that's hidden in our business data. And obviously we serve the users, and they drive requirements to us, but we drive them in terms of adoption, engagement, and awareness. And again, that structure for us has just been one of the only ways we've really been able to roll out to scale.
So the next key takeaway we want to talk about is how everyone at any level basically can have an impact. So not just C-suite executives saying we need this dashboard and we're going to make these investment decisions, but all the way down to that single site account manager level, they can say, you know what, I need to hire 5 extra people this week because I'm behind or I'm going to be short and I'm going to be running overtime. So everything, and then everything in between. Things from HR as well, and sales and IT and everything in between. So we really made this a one-stop shop for everyone. And how that's done is by having understandable, actionable metrics. So it's great having data, but if it's not driving an action, then it's just data and it's information that's sitting there. It also needs to be able to guide your team to a logical conclusion, and then we'll cover like feedback. If we roll something out and it's not right, we need to be able to adjust that. So the first piece is understandable and actionable metrics. So we'll go over an example of a good card and a bad card. This is an example of a poor card, and this is actually something that we really did. We started looking at a certain metric, which was basically unbilled hours, so hours that we don't bill back to clients, which is lost revenue for us. But essentially when we first looked at it, an example is like poor naming. It's not showing exactly what we're really looking at. It's like non-billed hours, but what does that ultimately mean? What are we trying to do with this card? There's no target on it, so a lot of our cards will say, you know what, here's your number, but this is where we want you to be. So they can say, oh, I'm actually under that. I don't need to look at this card. I'm going to work on something else. Or, you know what, I have an area of improvement here. I'm going to focus on this more. So we try to have as many targets and frames of reference as possible across all of our cards. And then there's no clear action. That's probably the main thing on this card, is that what do you do with this data? And the main thing we ran into with this was, if you look at where it says too granular on the right, there's actually over 1,600 combinations that make up those about 15 to 20 categories. So there was just so much data that even we didn't know what to do with it and actually how to remedy it. And if the people designing the cards are struggling with identifying what actions need to be taken, then your end user, especially the person that isn't familiar with all the data, is most likely not going to be able to understand it either way. And then just too many labels. So this was just too granular, and it doesn't necessarily line up to what each column is. Sometimes the labels aren't consistent across the cards, so making sure that from one card to the next, the experience that your consumer or your users are seeing is consistent, so that they're not confused by what they may see. So here's an example of actually a real card that we had out as well, and it's one of our more successful programs that we've rolled out. So this has a target on it of where we can get to, and then increments. So the orange is how far away you are from your target. The green is how much that's been achieved. So you can actually see how you're tracking towards that. And this is actually updated pretty regularly too, basically every week. So users all the way down to those single-site account managers, all the way up to our CEO, can see how individuals are performing on these metrics, and they can drill down into it too. So maybe one RVP looks to be doing a really good job, but if you drill down, it's really one branch manager that's driving all of his improvement. So we actually need to work with those other branch managers to make sure that they're doing everything they can as well. And then a short but descriptive title as well. So this is our margin improvement. So this is how much margin we can actually get back within our business. And then having great labels as well is on the side here. So if it's gained, if it's lost, if it's remaining. So just having a very clean and clear cut about what needs to be done as well. So on the far right, you'll see user inputs. So it says client-driven increase, minimum wage, or rebid. So that's basically what led to this issue in the first place, and we can identify those. So you can say how much of our business is impacted by rebids, or how much is impacted by client-driven increases. And you can see how much we've recovered in certain scenarios. And then we also have user inputs as well of what they're going to do about it. So in the bottom you see adjust staffing, renegotiate, request an increase. Those actions have been agreed to by the end user, and we can hold them accountable to that then. So across 5,000 managers, we can now say, you know what, you agreed on this job that you were going to renegotiate that contract by X date. Have you done it yet? And we can surface all that in this data. So it allows for a conversation, an educated conversation around what needs to be done to drive the overall metrics. And then probably the most important thing, at least in my mind. It's fantastic we can build out these cards and these metrics and drive some change. But always solicit always solicit candidate feedback. When I walk into a branch, I'll do whatever I'm there to do, whether that's changing a process, trying to make it more efficient, or just train them on Domo or any of our other systems. But I always end it with, pie in the sky, what would you want? If we could do anything in the world right now, what would be helpful for you? And I was actually pleasantly surprised by how realistic and actually easy to achieve a lot of those requests were. A lot of those requests we'd actually already done. It was just a matter of saying, here it is. And that goes a long way towards more adoption, more engagement. And then they won't be afraid to give you more feedback in the future too. Our operational cards, I probably made about 60 to 70% of them. And then the other 30 to 40% were all based on feedback from the field. And then I've iterated through all those cards to make them better and more accurate, just based on everybody's feedback. This is a snapshot of real feedback I actually got a couple weeks ago. It would be very helpful to see if they're new hires that are scheduled for under 40 hours. So basically, our weekends on a Thursday, are you flagging this individual that was hired on a Wednesday? Because they're absolutely not gonna have 40 hours in one day, which made complete sense. I didn't think about it, but now we're gonna go back and we're gonna change that card to remove our new hires so that it's really only showing the full resources that are on the bench that we can actually use. And they're not having to hunt through and determine, oh, was this person a new hire? Or they've been working for me for a long time as well. And then always test. If you roll something out, make sure it's validated. We have a lot of cards that are based on the same data, and so if you roll it out and you show it in the same way, the numbers should be exact. Even if it's off by 0.01, our users will spot that and they lose confidence in the data. So we double, triple check to make sure that every single data set matches, and that the new calculations we may be doing to show the data in a different way will ultimately get you to the same answer if a user decided to go back and use that card for a different purpose.
Also mature, I mean, another point there too is we recently started marking our cards as beta, or we actually created like a whole beta section in there where we have a page that we roll cards out to first, and that way it's really clear for our users that this is a card that we're trying out. We haven't certified the metrics yet. We think they look good based, just whoever's built it thinks it looks good, but they want feedback. And so that's been a really great way for us to, communicate in an ongoing and repeatable manner and scalable manner that this card is not yet one you should base hiring, firing decisions on. This is not a card that you should build your budget off of, but we want your feedback now during this time to tell us what works and what doesn't. And I think that's been pretty good for us too.
Yeah. And then so this basically just keeps going around and around and around. I have cards that we rolled out a year ago, and basically our business has changed. So somebody will say, you know what, this is a great way that we could show this card, and we'll go back and we'll see how long it takes, we'll test it out with them, and then we'll roll it back out. So it's a constant iteration. I liked what one of the people said yesterday, which was data science is never done, it's just do. Same thing with these cards. You may submit a card, but you ultimately have to go back and they'll always have another due date with more and more cards. So then guiding people to the next logical step. One thing we've really started using more now is storytelling. So how can we go from a broad business question down to those specific actions and really guide people towards the issue that is driving the overall metrics. So for example, this is overtime. So if our overtime is going up, what are the cards that really drive that metric? So it's workforce utilization, a reduction in how many employees we have, so basically turnover, and then are we losing contracts? Are we losing profitable contracts? And so we can guide each functional group to the right area too, because something's gonna look very different for HR that may drive overtime that our schedulers have as well. So schedulers are gonna be scheduling people, but HR, maybe we have a turnover problem or an employee engagement problem that we can address from an HR perspective. So try to surface all those things as well. And then for some of our more, I want to say complicated, but more involved initiatives, we'll put notebook cards. So if it's something that can't be just included in a description, having a very detailed notebook card that somebody can go through and identify what the steps are that they need to take. And then we've started leveraging Course Builder as well a lot now too. So then from basic card creation perspective and how you roll this out to people and make sure they're actually using it, some of the barriers to success are just the metrics aren't actionable. It's maybe a really, really cool metric, it's very insightful, but if it's not something that somebody can really drive change on, it's not super helpful for them, especially if it's gonna take a lot of effort to drive that change, and then based on their knowledge level as well. So internally, I'm one of the major Domos, Jesse knows our data backwards and forwards, but we have to consistently keep in mind that our users may not be the most tech savvy. They are highly engaged and highly motivated, but they may not know, like you said, how to drill into a card. So we need to keep those things in mind while we're building these. Too many cards that show the same thing. So if somebody's going to one card versus somebody's going to another card, they say the same exact thing and are trying to convey the same information, but there's a miscommunication from those two users. So we try to make sure that every card is basically unique and we don't have too many variations of that same card unless it's absolutely necessary.
I think on that point too, quick filters have been a huge help for us in that area. Prior to that, we would create several cards next to each other that just had different slices and different filters applied because our users were having difficulty using the page filters or the end card filters. So now that we've got quick filters, we use them. I mean, most of our cards have quick filters. We do, I think we talk about it in an upcoming slide. They should definitely be limited. You don't want to go overboard with it. You don't want to put in a list that's going to have 10,000 entries that may not make sense. But we do leverage them where appropriate, like you said, to help kind of consolidate those cards. Just provide a cleaner experience, make it a little bit more easier, a little easier to understand for our end users.
Yeah. And then, so the way we help this is Domo days. So we have recurring review sessions. We try to do it about once a year. Sometimes we'll up it to once a quarter if it really needs to happen. We actually have one that needs to come up pretty soon now, since we have some changes to make. But we take that as an opportunity, one, to make sure all of our cards are still relevant, all of our pages are clean, and then if any major updates come out, so like the new stories, we may take this opportunity to just do an entire refresh, make sure everything is brand new, and we'll announce a new Domo iteration to all of our users at once, and then we can address any questions as they come in rather than kind of picking and choosing cards as we go and just have time. And then lack of consistency, as I mentioned, if you have two cards that are built on the same data, a user should be able to find the same answer on either of the cards. So what we've been doing a lot more recently is sharing beast modes. And if somebody was looking at a metric between the major Domos, we'll just shoot an email and say, does anybody have a beast mode that does this? And if we do, we'll share it around so that all of our metrics are consistent. And then huge thing for us was leadership buy-in. Basically, this was driven from the top down. Our leadership bought in right away, and they go to Domo, they look at all the metrics there, which ultimately encourages others to look in Domo as well. So that's been a huge part of our success so far is if no one's really looking in Domo and your leadership is going to other systems to find that information, then everyone's going to go there too because that's the source of truth.
And I'll tell you, it's funny, I was actually on a call earlier today with our division presidents just listening in, and our division president in the East, they had their whole team on, all of their regional presidents, their vice presidents, everybody. It's I think a weekly or bi-weekly meeting that they have to just kind of catch up with their team. And he was actually in Domo on the call going through the different key points, which was actually really cool to see. I could hear his team too, they're quickly going through the cards on the call as well, saying, well, here, I see this item, him being able to actually, hold his team accountable and to know that everybody's looking at the exact same information. It was pretty cool. And it was something, like I said, we just couldn't have done 2 years ago. So that leadership buy-in has just been absolutely critical for us to achieving the kind of success that we have with it. Cool, thanks. All right, so as we talked about, or we mentioned earlier, going big to go small, I'm going to kind of show you a layout of how that works. Again, that's kind of rolling everything up to a key business problem, a key business question. And really the value in this, and we'll talk a little bit more about it here in a second, but the value in this is that you want things to be actionable. You want them to be relevant. You want them to be usable. You want them to provide value and to drive revenue and to improve profit and to decrease expenditures and whatever your specific organizational goals are. And the way that you do that is you tie the cards that you have back to initiatives and up to items. And so as an example of that, I kind of laid out very, very brief example, but effectively these 3 levels. You have a business need, as I said, then you have several programs potentially that help contribute to that business need. And then at the very end you have actionable cards. And so walking through an example of this, of how do we improve profit. And I'll actually show you a page we built to model this. This is one of the questions we had. And I mean, it's a question probably most companies have at some point. You want to know how to improve profit. And so we actually put this at the top of the page so that everybody understands what each one of the items on the page is driving towards, that is our ultimate goal here. As I mentioned, there are several programs that we have. In this case, there were 2 different programs that we used to improve profit, again, rolling back up. One of them we thought that would help was increasing our available staff. We know if we had more staff available, we wouldn't need to spend maybe as much on overtime. We would have positions that we are currently open that we'd be able to fill and to bill those hours. The other we did was reducing overtime, which again would effectively give us more profit because we'd be spending less on payroll for the same amount of work that we're doing. And again, they target 2 different areas. Although they have a lot of kind of overlaps and they definitely have a lot of correlations, they're set up as 2 separate pages in Domo for us. And they're, like I mentioned, they're each targeted for a different team. So we have our operations team that's really focused on, things like workforce utilization and, reduction potential. So if you reduce your overtime, or here's how much overtime you could reduce, 212 hours. And that's big for them because every week they can come in and they look at it and they say, okay, my goal is to get to 0 on this. Then, your workforce utilization. How well are you actually using the individuals that you do have on staff? And then again, just other items like a contract review, who might be up for a contract and potentially a rate change. On the recruiting and HR side, similar type of thing, all different stats related to that. Now, in terms of the actual layout of the page itself, we always have our, as I said, the business need or the problem across the top. Then we have the programs, and each one of those get a section header that just basically tells you what the program is and a rough idea of what it's for. Then we always have our key KPI. We always do one KPI in each area. And so you may be looking at this and saying, well, there's a bunch of stats. These ones across the bottom are our supporting metrics. Nobody's bonused on them. We don't use them for reviews, for like disciplinary reviews. We don't use them for your annual reviews. They're just there to help support the field and support our users in making the right business decisions. Ultimately, what they're bonused on, what really counts, is that middle line of overtime on the right and then applicant conversion on the left. And again, we follow this kind of 4-layered really. You've got your, like I said, your the problem, the actual program, your KPI, and then your stats. We follow this for, I think, just about all of our kind of productionized pages, if you will. All the major stats that we roll out, and all of our company KPIs are laid out in the same way, and it's been pretty helpful. In terms of actionable cards, I know Tyler went through a lot of this. I'm just going to cover 2 quick key points here. Actual versus target, that's really important for us on the card. We want people to really easily be able to identify whether or not they're hitting target. And if they are, how well are they doing? If they're not, how far are they from that target? Where are they landing? How are they performing? And then again, contributing factors. Anything at all that we can do to help make that easier for them to understand. Again, why? Just telling you that you're not converting as many applicants from application to actual hires, that's great, but what do you do with it? And again, that all kind of rolls back up to actionable cards. In terms of creating actionable cards, we actually, I can't take credit for designing this. This is actually Domo's from their knowledge base. There are a lot of different points on here and things that some of you are probably looking at and saying, well, who has the time? Who cares? Why is this really important? And I'll tell you something, we actually go through, we're just now starting to work on, we're just kind of rolling out our certification, and so that'll come into kind of our layout here as well. But we look at each one of these points before we roll out a production card. And they're, again, like I said, you may be thinking, why? What does it matter? And I'll give you an example. This is why details are important. We had this as an actual scenario. Again, we have cards, we have turnover cards on a few different pages of ours. Most of them are the same, but in some cases they're a different card because we're applying different filter or something similar. Anyway, we have manager A who was looking at his turnover and said, actually I shouldn't say it was him, it was his boss, the vice president, who was looking at his turnover and said, you dipped a little bit, which is great, you kind of peaked back up, but overall it's not really that bad. Then they talked to manager B and looked at their card, and taking a look at it, the guys all over the place. They were an absolute mess. They did really, really well. They dropped their percentage really well, but then they jumped back up, and the person on the right had a much different conversation than the individual on the left did. And the reason details are important here is because we found out the reason for that, what was driving that, when you add a scale to the card. Turns out they are the exact same number, the exact same stat in both of these cards. They show the exact same trend. The difference is the one on the left has a fixed axis. And this is an example of why details are important. Some cases you may want something like a fixed axis, others you may want variable. The important point though is that you stick to a consistent implementation of it. And again, great example of this where, like I said, something as small as whether or not you lock the axis or you set a min and a max can have a very big impact on someone's understanding and potentially the business decisions they make as a result of that understanding. So really, really important. One of the last, I think we're coming up on our kind of recap here. So one of the other last items we've got here is, and I'll just go through this real quick because we kind of already talked about it. This is a good kind of slide to really highlight that layout that I mentioned all before when you're kind of putting all this stuff together, right? Your business question, the program, your key KPI, and really try and limit that. You don't want to make all of these key KPIs that people are bonused on because they won't know what to look at. There's just too much information and people can't make effective decisions that way. You need to really try and focus it on the one that would provide the most impact. And then again, you provide them some correlated stats or impacting stats or anything at all that might help contribute to that. Then lastly, you're supporting documentation or supporting notes or a notebook card or, in this case, as we said, we want them to know who to actually contact in this case. If you have a question about the specific stat, we wanted to give them some definitions because that was really important as well because this was operating a little bit differently from what we normally do. So again, that's all part of how we communicate out to our very distributed user base. And then lastly, and we're actually a little ahead of schedule here, just a quick recap. Like we said, in terms of work smarter, not harder, right? You want to be able to focus on the recurring tasks with the largest potential impact, right? If you take away anything from this, it's that. You want to make sure that you're working as smart as possible. So again, recurring tasks, if you're doing them, the way I kind of work it with my team is if there's anything that we do more than twice, we should be automating it. Everybody can have an impact. Again, you want to be able to leverage individuals in your organization. Our COE structure has been hugely valuable for us. We find these individuals in the other key departments and functional areas that can own these stats, can talk to them, can help guide their direction in a much better way than myself or my team could ever do because I'm not working in HR every day. And lastly, go big to go small. Use that macro kind of large business need or business question to drive all of the other stats and all of the metrics and KPIs that you show. Because otherwise you have these items that don't really roll up to anything and they don't correlate, they don't sink in. Your employees aren't going to necessarily see value in it. They're not going to understand the whys behind it. And by tying it to this, you can show them how they have a direct impact on your company. And from what we've seen, that's just been absolutely huge to success. And so with that, we thank you guys for coming today. I know this was a lot of info, so we have time, actually a decent amount of time here for questions. If anybody has, I think, yes, we have somebody handing out mics.
Are your users mostly mobile or on the desktop?
They are, actually, it's funny you mentioned that. I was just looking at that last night. I built a card off it because I had that same question. We are only about 10% of our actions today are on mobile. We've just added that recently to our prereq training course, so we expect that to hopefully go up. Our users, even though they're distributed, they have laptops, so I think the majority of the time that's probably what's driving them there, but good question. Anyone else?
On the chart with the offers and the hires, how is it possible for your offers to be lower than the hires? Do you just have people hired without an offer or something?
Oh, we have.
About the business
that actually, it's dummy data I used for this card. Yeah, it's mass data.
I was just curious.
Yeah.
All of our offers are higher than our hires.
Yeah, good eye. I had a question up here too.
Thank you.
Yeah, so on your Domo days, so I'm assuming this is something you're doing with your satellite locations? Are you doing?
Yeah, well, we do it with our COE. So our COE, we all get together and we they're in their remote locations too, but we do like a video chat and we're on the phone most of the day. And we, as Tyler said, we just kind of go through all of our cards and pages and just kind of do a full review, make sure that we're really comfortable with where everything is at that point.
Okay, so it's not so much like training with the satellite users as it is.
No, exactly. It's our opportunity to really kind of make any larger changes that we wanted to that we just haven't been able to make up to that point.
That is a good point, though, that we kind of glossed over. Is we have the course builder as the initial piece, but that's not where we stop. I do a sequence of basic, intermediate, and advanced training once a month, and so it's a 3-day progression. So if people want to go through all 3 days, they can. And the first day is really around how does the mapping work? So if something doesn't look right, if your data doesn't look right, what actually goes into that? And who do you contact to update it to make sure you're seeing your right information? And then we go into really basic things like how to use the quick filter. If the quick filter is hidden, how do you expand it out? What's drilling down do? And then how do you get back out of drilling down rather than having to go all the way back out to the page and then clicking back into the card? So very basic things like that. And then the intermediate one is, okay, custom filters, things along those lines. We've grouped these pages in certain ways. So the beginning of how do you answer a business question, and then the advanced one is basically an open forum. And I usually only have about 20 to 30 people on that one. But it's really a working session. So that's how I try to push it out is any question you want to answer, any business question you have right now, that's what we're going to use as our training today. And I'll go through and use the cards we have to answer that business question and see what we can do to drive change along that metric.
I think we had another question up here.
You had mentioned that when you implement Domo to somebody that they have to complete training. You create that training. Do you implement it through Domo, and how do you track it, or do you export it into an LMS and then track it that way?
Yeah, no. So we do have an LMS because we have a full scale LMS for our security guards out in the field. The majority of the 200,000, right? They complete their work through an LMS. For our 5,000 that are in Domo, they actually complete the course in Course Builder. One of the great things about using that is you can actually link it up to your own instance of Google Analytics, and so then we bring that back in using another connector. And that's how we identify who've completed, and then our the automation processes we have in place, essentially the dynamic groups, will determine when they can come out of that kind of needs training group and into the HR or sales or whatever their permanent group is.
And one thing to add to that, we originally had in our LMS, and then we transitioned it recently about a couple months ago, and it was confusing for the user. Now when they get onboarded, they automatically get a link that says complete your training in Domo. People hear about it versus them not knowing which avenue to go. And so to drive adoption and drive knowledge about Domo, we wanted to point them there initially as well. So that's why we transition away from our LMS.
Lower the barrier to entry. They get in immediately as soon as they're eligible, and then they don't need to wait till they take the training course. I mean, to get full access, they do, but at least they're in there and they can see it and be hands-on with it, which has been pretty good too.
So my question was about your PDP groups, your PDP rules, and then do you automate bringing people in? So once they've cleared the training and they've joined the group, you have a script that runs that brings them in and invites them into Domo through an API. Are they assigned to a PDP group? And that's how they get access to their data, or are they directly assigned to a PDP rule?
Yeah, it's actually rules, because what we do is, and I think Tyler mentioned that the way we secure the business is everybody has access only to their own book of business. The reason we have almost 1 million PDP rules is because every one of our users has a completely unique access. So what happens is, in terms of automation, we have a process that we built that runs internally using Domo's APIs. And every hour we identify the individuals who've completed the training, we pull them out of that training group, put them into their permanent group. That'll give them access to cards and pages. They still don't have PDP at that point. Then the next step is I calculate out what their PDP should be based on our ERP system. And then we apply that using, again, Domo's APIs. And so every hour that runs, so that ensures that if their business changes, if they get promoted, if they move departments, if we have somebody new who comes on, if we have somebody who leaves, all of those actions are all automated as a result of that.
Is that all going through ADFS?
What was that?
Is that all going through ADFS?
No, we do have ADFS. We use single sign-on. It's actually just a custom process we built in-house.
Okay. Our data is not clean enough to be able to do that.
What was that?
Our data is not clean enough to be able to do that.
For us in Active Directory, certainly not. No, I was thinking about the attributes actually in terms of the new features they were showing and how you could have these trusted attributes in your identity provider. And one of the things I talked to the group about is, for us, our identity provider is maintained by the IT group, which is fine, but it's not updated. We don't update it. However, our ERP has accurate attributes. And so it sounds like, from what I understand, we may be able to use attributes other than just what comes through your identity provider. I don't know if that's going to be coming out with the feature or if it's a future enhancement, but it sounds like they understand there's a need there too, and that's probably how we would leverage it as well.
Yeah. And it was definitely a lift we have 1,600 titles. I spent a day going through and saying, what is Domo eligible, yes, no, and what group do they fit in? And so it took me 8 hours, but now all of our 1,000 users that we onboard in 1 week, based on the title that we have in our ERP system, we knew what group they go to, what pages are then given access to them, and then based on their additional mapping and the other rules we set, it's all done automatically now. So like bite the bullet for 8 hours up front, and then that saves so much. Like before we did that, it was we would have to move people in groups, and there was forces, and it was a lot more difficult to manage. And now it's just if somebody requests a like access and they're not in a title that we've granted eligibility for, then we just have that conversation around: is this truly a business need for this title, yes or no, or should that person actually have a different title? And then it's mostly an update on the individual side, and then during the next sync, it automatically provisions them again. So we have kind of our standard set in place.
I'll tell you what though, based on what we saw this week, we'll definitely be switching as soon as the final few features are in place that we need. We'll definitely be moving to dynamic groups, dynamic PDP. I think that will solve all of our issues there. And then also the business process automation. I definitely see us using that for an approval of a new title to be Domo eligible. As Tyler mentioned, we have those requests. I'd like to see us using that as well.
Have you had any issues with a card owner leaving the company, and then what happens to that card? Because you said it was checked every hour.
Yeah, do you, I can talk about it?
Like cards leaving?
Way. Yeah, like an individual leaving the organization, and so
Oh yes, yeah, I'll talk about that. Yeah. So usually, so right now, there's kind of one or two, as you mentioned, one or two people in each functional area. And in December, we had 3 people basically leave. Like between November and December, 3 people left that managed a bunch of cards. So we basically come together as BICOE, and it's who's most knowledgeable about those cards. So for example, I took a lot of them back onto me because I created them initially, and then we rolled them out as we brought more people on and made these major domos. And so we transitioned them, so logically it made sense that I take those back. We also then had other people that were managing some of those initiatives, so we would split them to those individuals. But it's really, that piece is more around who's most knowledgeable to answer questions about it, because we steer every single user towards, if you have a question, you go to the card owner. Like you don't email Jesse, you don't email me directly, you click on the card owner name, find their email address, and you call them or email them. So we try to align it to who knows that initiative and who can speak to it.
And then from a technical perspective, we have checks in place so that we don't remove accounts if somebody owns assets until we can reassign them. Very cool. Any other questions? All right, so with that, we'll call it then. Thank you guys, really appreciate you joining.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks so much, guys.